Tell us a little bit about this article and why you thought it was important.
Yeah, and you're going to see a lot more articles. This was just from the TMO stream last week because that was all that was available, but there are a bunch of articles out there now. This was really exciting news. So, I think we all know and are aware that there are places in the United States where there isn't great mobile coverage. And that certainly has been an issue for people trying to get connected with broadband, and our government has billions of dollars available these days to build out broadband in areas where it doesn't exist. And that is super and very much needed. But last week there was this very exciting announcement between T-Mobile and SpaceX about joining forces in order to provide that coverage to these areas that are unserved starting in 2023. And this is just tremendous news because, of course, it'll be super for people on the ground. And I think they're thinking initially this will just be text messaging and SMS, so this is not, full-blown broadband, which other programs are really looking to fill that gap. But what I find really tremendous about this is we've been for years talking about how are we going to better integrate these terrestrial wireless networks and these satellite networks and enable better service on the ground to fill in those dead areas, but also in the air. As part of the autonomous systems work that many of us are involved in, that's often a criticism. Sure, we'd like to use the commercial wireless networks to support UAS, but there are these dead zones, and how do we respond to that? And so I think this is very important work by SpaceX and T-Mobile might start to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. As Don and I can relate, getting coverage when we're out in the fields to do these streams is a huge deal, right? And you when you actually go across the country and you find that there are essentially these dead zones, you wonder what this means in terms of economic viability for that region, and it deeply affects people. Being connected to the internet is essentially, you know, some people have said it should even be a human right at this point. So, Carla, what's your take on this?
Well, it is definitely an equity issue because if you think about it, you can hardly do any business now without having to access the internet in some way. You can hardly bank without it. You can't get educational resources. You can't get access to any services that you might need without an internet connection. And of course, we have public spaces like libraries and things that are helping to fill that need. But that doesn't help you, when you're in the middle of farmland. It doesn't help you, when you're miles and miles away from anywhere you can access that. And even having a lifeline and communication for people who are in more remote areas, even at that texting and SMS level, is a huge opportunity for us to kind of really get people safer, get people more access to what they need, let alone enabling all of those business cases that you mentioned.
To Carla's point, I was at Home Depot yesterday, and they give a military discount, but in order to receive it, you have to have an app downloaded to your phone. So, to her point about how pervasive just having internet connectivity is, so if I was at a Home Depot in a remote location, I couldn't download that app, then, and they were talking about how a number of veterans, they just don't even know how to use sometimes, the internet or these apps, so, that's a really big deal. And then the idea of, kind of building on this pervasive nature of the internet, how many times have any of you been driving out in the middle of nowhere using your app for position navigation time, right? Basically a GPS app, whether it's Waze, right? WAZE, or Google Maps or something. And all of a sudden you hit a dead zone and you're like, oh my God, where do we go? That actually happened to me a couple years ago. We were, a colleague and I from the Air Force Academy were driving down to a nuclear testing facility in New Mexico. And we were literally in the middle of nowhere, and our map stopped working. And it probably took us an extra hour to get there because we had no idea where we were. So the benefits of this, just from basic navigation to daily life, they're just so significant.
So,
And I'll just jump back in. And I'm sorry, Mike,
no, no,
I just
no.
want to say that the work SpaceX is doing here is so important and groundbreaking, right? These low Earth orbit satellites that they are launching in the thousands are providing coverage already today in areas where we haven't had it, right? And so now connecting that with our terrestrial wireless systems makes it even more powerful. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, so I actually experienced what Dom was talking about literally this weekend. I went up to New Paltz for a family trip, and one of the things when you're on the mountain and you see these cliffs and you're like, God forbid I fall or anything bad happen to anybody, and you're looking and your cell coverage isn't there. You're like, what happens, if there's an incident? And it's funny, when you, not funny, haha, but when you actually go into the park, they ask for your ID, your license plate, they take all that down, and I bet that's just in case your car is there for 3 days, they go looking. So clearly connectivity has all of these other layers to it. One thing I wanted to ask you, Jennifer, though, is I saw it's about 2 to 3 megabits per second up and down. That doesn't seem like a lot when we're looking at 35 is kind of like standard for streaming Netflix.
Yeah.
Guaranteed for emergency uses, you probably only need to get a text through or a location through. But in terms of like rich media, which is important for education, it doesn't seem like this will get us there, right? There's more
That's
work
right.
to be done.
That's right. Two different purposes here. So I think this coordination between T-Mobile and SpaceX is going to provide text messaging, SMS, sort of low data, as you're pointing out, but sort of a critical connection where you don't have it. Separately, if you were just subscribing to the SpaceX broadband internet access, you would find that the speeds are quite a bit higher up and down. And that's why I was mentioning that there's all of this funding available for building out broadband in these remote and unserved areas. One thing I will note there, which is really important, our government has changed the standards by which they measure adequate broadband. So it used to be that it was 20 down and a few up, maybe it was 20 and 3, was adequate broadband as they had defined it. Now it's actually 100 down.
Wow.
That's what they're looking to fund. So what's really important for the listeners to know is if you're in an area that has broadband but the speeds aren't great and the capacity isn't great, that's all going to change because the government's actually going to fund building out those networks to 100 megabits per second downstream.
And getting back to this agreement, I hate to use the FAA's language here, but it's almost like this kind of crawl, walk, run approach. Like they alluded to this idea of kind of buying into advanced plans. And then also T-Mobile has an open invitation to different carriers around the world to collaborate to make this a global connection, not just a United States connection. So the beginning of something big, I think, really big.
Completely agree. And then, if we think about, so now let's go up into the air. The amount of data that's needed in order for aircraft to be able to communicate where they are and to communicate essential operational information is quite a bit less than what humans need for broadband. So this kind of collaboration actually could provide that connectivity in remote areas where it's really essential when, aircraft, unmanned aircraft principally, are flying. So think about the really interesting work NASA's doing with wildfire mitigation. Some of those areas, in our national forests, there is no connection out there. But think about what this could provide. So, and I know, SpaceX and Starlink already are thinking about applications in the air. So this is really an important thing to watch.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's really interesting. People, I think, overestimate how much data you would need to keep an aircraft in the sky and know where it is, right? And what its health is per engine. All you could get troves of data, and it still is probably going to be like less than a kilobyte, right? Because it's very, very simple textual data, and so yeah, that's with 2 to 3 megabits per second, you could actually get quite a lot for advanced air mobility, drones. Complex delivery systems would be able to be sustained probably on a network, even with that low bandwidth. So exciting times, certainly. So, but these aren't the only providers of this kind of gap coverage, right? There's other firms that are kind of working towards this too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and with all of the federal government money that's available, we're going to see a big push into this area. So for the Broadband Equity and Access Deployment Act, it's known as BEAD. The states actually will be administering the funding there. It's money that's coming through NTIA and then through the states, and companies will probably start to be able to apply for that next year. We're waiting on conclusion of broadband mapping so that we know as a nation where people really, have the broadband and at the adequate speeds and do not. And then the states will be able to start rolling that money out. There's a lot of information on that. I think we've got some stuff up on our website, videos that go through those programs. But yeah, I would, you should expect that many of the rural broadband providers that are out there today and others are going to be actively participating in this program and helping to build out broadband where we need it.
That's